South Africa's just energy transition will create unique socio-technical policy challenges and opportunities for local governments. SALGA works to support local governments in navigating local energy transitions within the complex South African institutional context. SALGA is collaborating with WWF South Africa and the Just Urban Transitions Project to host a series of webinars on practical and pressing issues currently facing municipalities, with contributions from many other partners. This webinar focuses on energy poverty in South Africa's cities and towns. The webinar begins with a contribution from the City of Cape Town, which has partnered with WWF and the IISD to understand the challenge of the moving target of subsidized energy provision for cities. We are joined by Thandeka Chabalala, who will be presenting on behalf of the city, followed by Andrea Bassi, who will then expand on the process and value of modeling to generate policy responses to complex challenges such as this one. We will then move on to a panel discussion with Bathandwa Vazi from Sustainable Energy Africa, helping us to zoom out to the national picture of energy poverty and vulnerability across the country. Then Damian Conway from the iShack project will be reflecting on the role of the private sector-led innovations in responding to the gaps currently existing with informal sector responses to energy poverty. Thandeka will then join us again as a respondent. There will be time for questions in between all the presentations. But now, back to the beginning. Louise Scholtz from WWF will kick off proceedings. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over now to Louise to provide us with a brief introduction to the collaboration that sits behind this particular interesting case within the city of Cape Town. So thank you very much, Louise.
Thank you, Lauren, and good afternoon, everyone. And I think once again, a sincere thank you to SALGA for hosting and Lauren for pulling together this fourth webinar in the Just Urban Transition series. As part of our Urban Futures portfolio of work, WWF has been engaging with municipalities over the past 3 years on electricity-related challenges. The aim of this work is to provide them with technical support to manage the energy transition, which is, of course, rapidly transitioning away from a linear fossil fuel-dependent electricity system to one that requires them to manage a new reality of households that are now prosumers, both buying electricity and feeding it back into the grid. And this, of course, brings challenges. On the one hand, technical issues relating to grid infrastructure maintenance and strengthening, management of variable energy, but also on the other, the impact of reduced revenue, either because affluent households are now purchasing less electricity or because they're migrating off the grid completely. And as we all know, this holds serious implications for municipalities' ability to continue to cross-subsidize electricity to low-income households. So, informing this work today, WWF South Africa with the Center for Renewable and Sustainable Energy Studies at Stellenbosch University have been looking into the impact of embedded generation on the distribution system of municipalities and are busy with the development of an agent-based model. And the objective of that model is to provide insight into the complexities of the electricity system, to enable better tariff setting, whilst ensuring at the same time that the increased investment in household rooftop PV supports municipalities' climate objectives, such as reducing the percentage of fossil fuels in the overall electricity mix, while at the same time ensuring affordable and equitable energy access to all their residents. And in essence, what this means is that municipalities must ensure that the more affluent households do not decouple from the grid but remain connected, reimburse municipalities adequately for their connectivity, and so doing strengthen the overall resilience of the system, whilst avoiding, of course, the decimating revenue, whilst avoiding at the same time decimating the revenue stream of municipalities. So the modeling that ISD will share with you today builds on that work through exploring a cost and trade-off for free basic electricity access, using a systems-based approach. They've created a qualitative and quantitative model to map and understand the complexity related to energy consumption, using a systemic method to identify the underlying drivers of change in the system, capturing both policy-driven synergies and possible side effects. And this was a co-production and a collaborative approach with the City of Cape Town. So I'm particularly looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the key insights that they will be sharing with us today. And then just a final acknowledgement, both these projects would not have been possible without the funding that we received from the WWF Nedbank Green Trust, for which we want to thank them. And on that note, Lauren, I think it's over to you. I hope everyone enjoys the webinar.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Louise. And now I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, who is Thandeka Chabalala, who works in the low-income energy services units at the City of Cape Town. We're very excited to have her here. Her unit is located within the Sustainable Energy Markets Department within the city, and her experience includes the implementation of various projects, not only exclusively related to energy, but also to informal settlement upgrading, which I think is a really pressing and critical intersection for us to consider within our explorations and problem solving for energy poverty in the country. She also considers issues of urban resilience and low emissions development, not only in South Africa, but also looking across the continent as well. So we are very happy to have you, Thandeka, and over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Lauren, for the introduction. Really, it was very impressive. I'm sorry, I keep getting calls from the city. As Lauren has mentioned, I am part of the low-income energy unit team. It's a team of 3 people. It's a very small team, and it's in the Sustainable Energy Markets Department. I will present to you just an overview of what the city is currently working on and what are the main challenges. Sorry, I can't move the slide. Sorry. The City of Cape Town has 100% electrification policy for all residents in the city. That means that includes residents in informal settlements and in backyard dwellings and also in formal areas. And the city has 2 distribution licensed electricity distribution areas. The one in purplish blue color is the Eskom distribution area, and the one in yellow is the City of Cape Town distribution area. Sorry, there's a bit of a delay in my slides. Sorry, there's a bit of a delay. Yeah, sorry. When we look at access to energy at the city, although this is not a very good way of looking at it, we can group access to energy in 3 different categories. The first category is households that have access to electricity that are already electrified. These are households in informal and formal dwellings. And these households currently receive an energy relief package of a free basic electricity allocation every month. They also receive a subsidized lifeline tariff if they are on the City of Cape Town distribution area, and a home light tariff if you're on the Eskom distribution area. And there is another category which I have mentioned, what I've called households awaiting electrification. These are households that are in the pipeline for electrification, and usually it can take about 3 years from planning to implementation for these households to have access to electricity, to be connected to the grid. And there's another category of households that are located on unelectrifiable areas. And these areas are mostly informal settlements that are located on encumbered land, such as flood-risk zones, servitudes, private land, etc. And both households that are awaiting electrification and those that are unelectrifiable currently do not have access to any energy subsidy. And if compared to those that are electrified, they are highly vulnerable to energy poverty. The City of Cape Town has a 97.7 electrification rate. This is based on the 2016 figures, not the ones that Silas quoted earlier when he started the webinar. However, there are about 10,000 households that cannot be electrified because they are located on encumbered land. And also this number is not very reflective of what is happening on the ground, given the fact that last year we saw a high number of land invasions. And there's a further 23,000 households that are currently in the queue to receiving grid electricity. And this can take up to 3 years. We do not know the number of backyard dwellers that are currently not receiving any subsidy or that are not connected to the grid. So this is an area where we still need to work on. And as we know, a lot of backyarders, since they are connected via their landlords, they are currently being exploited, and they also suffer a lot when it comes to energy poverty. The city has about 31% of its residential customers on the Lifeline tariff, and about 140,000 customers received the FBE allocation in the Eskom distribution area. And when you look at the average monthly expenditure, you can see that households on the Lifeline tariff still spend less money when compared to all the other households in the domestic category. And when you look at consumption, households that are also in the Lifeline tariff are also consuming less electricity. This is partly not their fault because the way that the tariff is structured is in such a way that when customers consume more electricity, they get moved to the next block, and which costs more money. And this current structure is not very good in alleviating energy poverty. We have done a number of research projects with different stakeholders. One of them is the 250 kilowatt study, which focused on optimizing the effectiveness of electricity services to low-income households. It looked at how long the 60 kilowatt hour FBE provision lasts in a household. And it found that although residents receive the FBE allocation every month, it normally lasts them a very short time, which was 7 days. And for households to move out of energy poverty, the city would need to provide 250 kilowatt hours. However, this is currently not an affordable option for the city. Another study, which was completed last year, looked at models that the city can employ to deliver best energy services to low-income households. They modeled 5 scenarios to look at the best way that the city can provide energy services in an affordable manner to both households and the city. And one of the, a few of the recommendations that came out of that study was that a package of solutions rather than one technological approach is critical to addressing energy poverty. So the city has to move away from one model, which is just electricity provision, but look at other energy services. And also the city has to work on collecting and managing critical data. So understanding what is happening at the household level in order for us to be able to intervene effectively. And also one of the recommendations was that we have to learn by doing through incremental implementation and also approach implementation strategically in order to gain insights and use those insights for a much bigger implementation plan. And one of the other recommendations was that we need to look at aligning our energy poverty interventions with other departments' policies. So we have, for example, if you remember this year, the Human Settlements Strategy was put out for public comment. So we have already tried to align that what the Human Settlements Strategy to some of the areas of intervention that our unit is trying to work on. However, all of this said, all of the above said, as I've mentioned, there is a high influx of low-income households coming into the city, meaning that there will be an increase of low-income households that will require access to energy in different forms. And coupled with this, the city is experiencing a decline in national grant allocation. The electricity sales are declining as high-income households are defecting from the grid. And thus the city has, in order for the city to maintain the subsidized provision of affordable electricity for households, for low-income households, is narrowing. And this will require innovative, affordable, and user-acceptable alternative energy solutions to be found. And we understand that we need to do this in a collaborative manner with other departments, with other stakeholders, businesses, and civil society. What we are currently working on in the short term as a city is investigate the possibility of providing a subsidy for alternative energy for households that currently do not have access to grid electricity. And also we are collaborating with the Human Settlements Department in the installation of solar water heaters through the DMRE program. And we're also working on a communication strategy because we've realized that the city is currently not doing enough in terms of communicating to low-income households. So we are working on some of those issues. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you very much, Thandeka, bang on time. So thank you very much for that. I am now going to hand over to our colleagues at the IISD to take us through the modeling exercise that was undertaken in partnership with, sorry, there are lots of people joining, so I'm just admitting them, that was undertaken in partnership with WWF and the City of Cape Town. So I'm going to hand over to Andrea Bassi and Lisbeth Cassier, who are going to share with us insights, not just ones that are relevant to this initial project that was undertaken with the City of Cape Town, but also to unpack some of the relevance for this study and for this kind of process for all municipal governments, all local governments in South Africa. So thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you. I'll get started. This is Andrea Bassi, and I'll ask Lisbeth to come in later on. I hope that you can see the screen, the full slides I'm sharing. Perfect. So as indicated earlier, we'll share some insights from the modeling work we've done for the City of Cape Town, but then also extend the main lessons learned for other municipalities that may want to embark in a similar process. And so here you see a summary. I want to start with a summary of these thoughts as a starting point, and then dig deeper into the modeling exercise. So we see, both in these cases for other cases, that modeling could support policymaking by allowing the creation of a shared understanding of the problem. And this means bringing together different players at the city level or also regional level, have them sort of sit together, so to say, in a digital platform to identify what are the key indicators that should be analyzed, how they're connected to one another, and how not changing policy at the moment may give rise to further issues going forward. Or maybe also how implementing only one policy, as we heard before, may not solve the problem entirely. So how we need to take that more systemic approach to identify what are the most viable and sustainable solutions. Now, that meeting of the parties in a way, in the creation of a system map, as we call it, would also help us identify what type of analysis is needed. So what are the boundaries of the system to analyze? Do we need to look at economic performance for the city, for instance, because that may be important in determining the intention for people to move in to the city area, or is that not necessary? Should we look only at the households as we have them now in the city and focus more on how to provide the energy they need? At the same time, developing this diagram with this co-creation approach can help us identify what are the intervention options. And by these, I mean policies, targets, investments, support being provided. So the whole range of options that may be available, maybe not only on the energy side, on the access to energy, maybe also on the supply of energy, maybe also on the urban planning side, so as to bring together different policy processes in the same type of assessment. And finally, what we think would be useful with the type of models we have developed based on the system dynamics methodology is that we can run them in a matter of a second. And so they could be used in a meeting to test different options just by moving a slider, changing a model input to see immediately what would be the outputs of the model. Now, in the context of what we have done for the city of Cape Town, what we have aimed to do here is to create an analysis that is broader, that takes into account all the elements that have been mentioned in the previous presentation that may not have been captured in all the modeling exercises or the type of data that are available at the moment in the past. So we try to extend the analysis to have a broader range of indicators and then to identify, based on that systemic view, what may be the synergies and bottlenecks with other intervention areas. So what would be the mix of interventions that could lead to sustainable outcomes in the longer term? Now, this is a complementary assessment. It's basically integrating knowledge and information across different studies. But I have to say, and this is clear especially for the Cape Town process, that the goal of the assessment is not to provide a precise answer. The goal of the assessment is to bring all the parties involved in the process up to speed, bring them to the same page, establish that connection, that conversation that is needed to co-create a strategy that then is more successful or sustainable for all parties. So the goal of this modeling exercise I'm going to present is not to come up with the optimum number for, say, how much support to be provided for different types of households, but it's really to help us understand what are the right questions to ask and what are the right topics to discuss as we go through this process. So that being said, keeping in mind that we aim at informing the decision-making cycle, not just to provide the answer, the outcome for us in this specific case for the city of Cape Town was to create a model to map and understand the complexity related to energy consumption, upon which then strategies could be tested and implemented. Now, the model uses a systemic approach. We focus on identifying and quantifying the underlying drivers of change for the system. So how the economic growth of the city leads to more households incoming, how the cost of energy determines whether households can afford to move to an area that is electrified and formal, as opposed to being in informal areas, electrified or non-electrified. And at the same time, what is the potential role of introducing better access to energy, providing electrification options, or working on energy efficiency, for instance? Now, the approach, as I said, model co-creation via group model building, and this has been carried out with online sessions. Now, the methodology we used, I'll be very, very brief on this, is system dynamics. This methodology was created in the 1950s in the United States, but it has been applied to a variety of topics over the last 70 years. As you can imagine, we use it for sustainable development, but it can also be applied to a variety of other fields, including supply chain management, industrial competitiveness, national development planning, even for the sustainable development goals. So it is really a method that allows us to connect the dots across different, say, social, economic, and environmental dynamics or indicators in the system. Now, it allows us to compare how a change we introduce in the system leads to changes in the outcomes of the system. Meaning, if we introduce a policy, it allows us in a transparent way to figure out how that change that we introduce ripples through the system with a domino effect, like it's presented here in the slide, to then determine whether the outcomes are what we are looking for or whether we may give rise to side effects. This modeling approach also looks at different time dimensions, meaning that it forecasts with a semi-continuous time. So we have results for every month or every year, depending on how we set up the model, and it looks into the future. So it supports an investigation of the past, to then look into the future. It has also the opportunity, or it offers the opportunity to look at a spatial assessment where we can have a map and figure out how change happens across the map, especially in this case in relation to different spatial planning dimensions and the accessibility or the probability or the cost of providing energy or electricity in this specific case to different parts of the city. And then, as I said before, it supports modeling across disciplines. And so we can have one single model to then understand why change is happening. Now, the main tool, if you think about implementation now, to create this model is called causal loop diagram or a system map. This is where the process of co-creation starts. Now, I will guide you through a few slides that we have developed over the course of 2 meetings of about 3 hours each, just to give you an idea of the thinking that went into developing the model. So we start with a few key indicators, and then we discuss and start adding more and more components to the model, going from population to energy use, and then expanding to energy use by energy service, and then determining what are the energy sources that are being used, up to the outcomes of using certain energy sources. For instance, for externalities such as air quality, fire risk, deforestation impacts, or other health impacts, and then the economic aspects in terms of affordability, and how these ultimately affect economic performance and the extent to which we have changes in demographic trends and households composition. Now, the outcome of this exercise, on top of having these many variables that I'm sure look somewhat confusing now, was to identify in orange the intervention options, but then also, as a next step, is to identify what are the main thematic areas that we need to consider in the model if you want to carry out a more complete assessment. So as you can see, we certainly need population divided into different household groups. We need to look at dwellings and the type of energy access they have, formal, informal, electrified or not electrified. That gives us information on energy consumption that then leads to social and environmental externalities, all of which are being then used for the economic analysis, which has to do both with energy pricing and cost, but also with the external costs. These then define affordability, lead to economic competitiveness, which ultimately re-affects population again. So this is just to give you an idea that this model has been custom built for this specific analysis, and it is based on that process of co-creation that I mentioned before. So it does lead to a unique set of data applied to a unique formulation of the model that is designed to answer a specific policy question. Now, from here, we move to the mathematical model. Now, the mathematical model makes use of data, other reports, so local knowledge. So this combines everything we have discussed before, but makes it quantitative, meaning we add numbers in this case. And it simulates from the past. As I said, it starts simulating in the past for us to be able to validate the numbers and then continue the simulation into the future. The way we have used this model is as follows. We have created now 2 hypothetical scenarios just to understand what are the changes driven by policy modifications in the model. One is a business as usual case with no change in policies, and then an alternative case, just for illustrative purposes, that that introduces, let's say, a subsidy for about 20% of the electricity price in 2022, and then removes this subsidy in 2025. Now, this is a specific intervention option. We could have provided access to a certain quantity of, say, kilowatt hours of energy. In this case, we focus more on changing the price to show a direct impact on affordability for all the households that are connected to the grid or have access to electricity in general. So the outputs that we generate include a variety of indicators. We see changes in energy consumption, for instance, of course, an expansion of the use of electricity, it becomes more affordable, but also due to the fact that energy is more affordable now, we see some higher level, more top-down type of changes. What we see that more affordability implies more economic growth, more consumption, spending in other areas, and so more economic growth, which potentially leads to changes in energy consumption also for other fuels, not only for electricity. So on the one hand, we see some short-term beneficial effects in improving access to energy, but on the other hand, we also see the potential emergence of stronger impacts concerning externalities. But nevertheless, in the longer term, we see positive impacts because of the potential for fuel switching and the overall improvement in economic performance. With the caveat, as mentioned in the previous presentation, that an improved economic performance for the city of Cape Town may actually lead to more people coming in, and this could be backyard dwellings and so on. So areas where we need more effort and more support to be provided. So here is one example of the numerical results of the model. This graph shows the expenditure for energy for different types of households. So this is the overall cost, and here on the horizontal axis we see the time dimension with the model running from 2016 to 2040. And at the bottom here you see the legend, where we have in different colors the types of households, formal and informal electrified, backyard dwellings that are for each of the scenarios, the baseline scenario and the alternative scenarios being presented in the graph. So you can see clearly here at the top the impact of introducing the subsidy for electricity. It reduces the cost immediately as it is introduced in 2022, and then that cost advantage disappears after 2025 when it's removed, when the subsidy is removed. What we notice, on the other hand, is an important reduction early on, a little bit of a rebound effect after the first year, and that rebound effect also goes away in the opposite direction after the removal of the subsidy. So basically, we introduce the subsidy, we tend to consume more than we did before. When the subsidy is removed, we realize that we cannot consume more, so we go back to improving energy efficiency, being more careful in the way we use energy, and so we go back to the previous trend that we see here. Now, these two lines, the blue one and the dark red one, are the lines for households that are in informal electrified settings. And the ones that we see at the top here, the gray and orange or yellow, are the ones for households that are in formal electrified settings. So what we see here is a small difference. We see more energy consumption going forward in formal electrified situations. Now, this is because primarily we have a transition, meaning that we see that over time, if increased affordability, as I said before, there may be a movement from informal to formal settlements or from non-electrified to electrified settlements, and then allows us to have a shift in the household composition in the city. Now, this is presented in this slide, and I apologize for the small numbers, but I wanted to show both the absolute values at the top of households by settlement area, and then the percentage composition of different households groups into these different settlement areas. And so we see in the alternative simulations that the formal electrified group increases in incidence or percentage of the total, while all the other areas tend to decline. Of course, the ones that decline the most are the areas that are already electrified, where you see more of the advantages we've seen before from reduced energy costs. Because if we introduce a subsidy for electricity, there is no practical direct advantage for those households that live in non-electrified areas. But there are advantages for in an indirect way for the overall improvement of the economic situation and performance for the city. Now, at the same time, we see that energy consumption changes. In the short term, we have an increase in energy consumption across the board. Positive development is the higher, of course, electricity use. Unwanted or unexpected development may be the increase in energy consumption from other uses as well. Again, this is more of a knock-on effect from the result of an improved performance of the economy, having more money to spend in other activities, which results in energy use from other activities as well. We do acknowledge here that there is a strong component of culture and social dynamics, so habits and so on and so forth. And this is taken into account in showing the extent to which there is a potential shift in energy use from one source to the other, which is somewhat limited in the short term. Then the externalities, an important factor that we also considered. We see that the potential increase in energy consumption in the short term without doing fuel switching too much leads to a potential increase in externalities by 2025. So when you have the subsidy introduced in full swing, and you see the largest potential impact also on the economic performance and consumption. But in the longer term, then we see a decline in this alternative scenario. So again, we see the potential for fuel switching coming in over time, as sort of a slow development, slow onset, as opposed to the immediate impact that happens right away from the introduction of the subsidy. So again, the time dimension here plays a role. So overall, moving away from these specific numerical results, these are the insights that emerge from looking at the systemic assessment done with the system map or the causal diagram, and then the mathematical model. So on the one hand, subsidies reduce the cost for households that already have access to electricity, and not for those in non-electrified buildings. On the other hand, there are indirect impacts that may have a positive consequence also for non-electrified households. So on the one hand, we have affordability that increases, at least on the energy side, and that leads to more economic activity and therefore potentially higher energy consumption. But if we increase energy consumption overall across different types of activities, then we don't only increase consumption for electricity, we also increase it for other energy sources. Now, this may have negative consequences if you look at the risk of fire, if you look at the externalities related to health, for instance. So this is something for the short term to potentially take into account and monitor. At the same time, if affordability increases, then more people may have the perception that they can afford to move to formal electrified housing, meaning if they can set more money aside now and accumulate for later on, maybe if there is supply available, that will allow them to move to more formal buildings and electrified as well. Now, this would be success for the policy because if affordability increases for them and there are improved economic conditions in the city, then they may move away from the subsidy, or they may have less of a need for receiving the subsidy or support for electricity use. At the same time, when we look at the performance of the city, as opposed to the performance of the surrounding areas or the rest of the country, then there could be more of a difference or perceived difference between the fast pace of the city of Cape Town and the slow pace of these other areas. And so that may lead to higher migration, land occupation, and backyard dwellings to increase. Now, this represents a challenge for the city because this is where, sort of the next frontier, this is where support will need to be provided in the future. So on the one hand, the success that they're creating is creating more of a need for continuing to engage and improve the situation for the new incomers. Now, we go back here to the intervention options. We see some positive outcomes that emerge from the analysis, some undesirable ones, and so, or less desirable ones. And so we go back to that policy mix that was mentioned before in the first presentation. Now, we also see that electrification, for instance, is a good way forward, although we acknowledge here that there are different roles and responsibilities for different actors involved in the system. But providing off-grid renewable energy, for instance, to reduce externalities, so reducing the social cost or societal cost, would also avoid the rebound effect where there would be an increased consumption for other more traditional fuels. So here we support fuel substitution, hopefully making it at the same time also more affordable. At the same time, improving energy efficiency could reduce the reliance on the subsidy for electricity, meaning that improving energy efficiency would reduce energy consumption, not access, but just the use, and at the same time reduce the cost of consuming that energy. So it would increase affordability and at the same time reduce the need or reliance on the subsidies. So by doing that, by working with electricity or using electricity, we also at the same time reduce the potential for externalities. So again, that fire risk from paraffin or health risk resulting from biomass use and paraffin at the same time. So that we rebalance to a certain extent the economic performance by having a lower energy cost potentially, but also by having lower external costs, which are tied to the fact that more traditional energy sources are being used. So these are, in a way, in a nutshell, the type of results that we obtain. And again, they're not the results of using a preset model where we just fed in specific data, but it's the result of conceptualizing, putting on paper, or one slide in this case actually, the complexity of the situation that was mentioned earlier, where we have all the elements of dynamics at the household level within the city, the type of energy sources that are being provided, also considered in relation to the dynamics of population and the potential change in household composition across different types of settlements. So I'll end my presentation here, and thank you for your attention and welcome additional comments, especially from Lisbeth, if you have any specific thoughts, anything that I've missed that you may want to highlight in terms of both the process and results. Otherwise, thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrea, and thanks to Thandeka also, Thandeka Chabalala from the City of Cape Town. I'm going to open it for questions. However, there's a question that comes from Karen. She's asking that what energy economic model tool was used. If you can start with that one.
I think just before we hand over to the question side, perhaps we can just give Lisbeth an opportunity to make any additional comments that she'd like to make from the IASD side. Lisbeth, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Actually, not at this stage. I think Andrea captured everything in terms of insights. I'm happy to provide more background to the methodology and how we originally came to this discussion. But I think we can first open for questions, so we have enough time for discussion.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks, Silas.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. Yes, the first question is about the tool, the modeling tool that you're using. If you can answer that, Andrea.
Yes. So we developed this customized model. So it's not a typical energy supply model, like could be the LEAP model or the TIMES model or Markar model. In this case, we create a custom model where we look at energy demand by household and by energy source based on specific energy service needs. For instance, lighting, cooling, cooking, for instance, appliances, and so on and so forth. So it is a fully custom built model that looks at, in a way, the trends that we have observed in history, and we change them based on policy intervention options. But so it captures a small energy balance at the city level, but it's something that can change dynamically over time as we change population values and needs for energy by different household types.
Okay, no, thank you. There's a question also from Batandwa, which is asking what public engagement platform are you using, or is the City of Cape Town using to engage the citizen? You can answer that also.
Well, that goes beyond me. I'm not sure what are the platforms that the city is using. So, yeah.
Perhaps Thandeka, could I invite you to respond to that question?
Hi, that's a very difficult question. I've just recently joined the city. I mean, it's been a year. And as I've mentioned earlier, we are working on a communication strategy, and it's currently with our corporate comms. And as part of the communication strategy, we'll look at different engagement platforms and what kind of topics can we engage on the different using different platforms. So it is still under development, and yeah, so I can't really respond on that. It's something that we are working on, and hopefully we will have it done in the next few months.
Okay, no, thanks, Thandeka. And a question to you also from Chris, in terms of how are you affording the subsidizing of your low-income tariffs? If you can also answer that, Thandeka.
So I think the subsidization, the cross-subsidization model is very complex. I haven't really been involved in it. But according to my understanding, most of the businesses are the ones that subsidize low-income households. Yeah, so it is a very complex. Our electricity department is the one that is responsible for that, but we do feed in as a unit based on how we think they should structure the tariff for the year, but otherwise I'm not really involved in it, and it is a lot of calculations that is involved, and it's also a balancing act where we look at the revenue and also expenditure. There's a lot of things that are taken into consideration.
I think we can definitely offer an offline response to that question as well, with a little bit more detail after this.
Yeah, correct. Before Andrea comes in, there's a question, yes, about the modeling tool. Thandeka, before you go, one of your current areas of work is basically investigation on the possibility of providing a subsidy for alternative energy for the households. I believe alternative energy, you are referring to paraffin, LPG, and the rest. Would you like to share the status quo? How far are you? What are the current considerations, and what are the timeframes for this investigation?
Yeah, so it is something that still requires a lot of internal discussion. We're now at a stage where we have looked at at how it can be distributed at the household level. So we are looking at, we're not looking to subsidize a particular energy source or service. So we are looking at subsidizing, providing a subsidy to households, and then the household would choose the type of energy that they think will benefit them based on their circumstances. So if they feel that LPG will work better for them, they can use that coupon to buy LPG, or if they feel that a solar home system can work for them, then they can use the subsidy to contribute towards accessing services from a solar home system service provider. It is something that we're still working on, and it still requires a lot of consultation internally in the city. But we have now started looking at distribution models and looking at our vending system, if it can allow for that or not. And yeah, so it's also consulted with our legal team. So it is pretty advanced from our unit perspective, but not we haven't consulted with the rest of the city.
Okay, no, thank you very much. Andrea or Lisbeth, a question about whether the tool is available to the public?
Yes, so we have developed a model using the software called Vensim. There are online versions of the software that do not require a paid license. So we are happy to share the model file and provide instructions for how the software can be downloaded and installed. We do have also a recording that we made a while back. It's about 1 hour and 20 minutes. It's a bit long, but it covers all the basics for how the software can be used. And so it's a guided step-by-step if you want to start practicing or anyone wants to start practicing with the software. So the short answer is yes. But I just want to put a word of caution there that it, of course, like any other new software, it may take a bit of time for you to familiarize with it. And at the same time, that the model we developed that we're going to share uses data for Cape Town. So for other municipalities, that may need to be modified and adjusted a little bit.
Okay, no, thank you very much. Before I hand over to Lauren, I would like to remind delegates that please do write your email address, organization, and your name on the chat box so that we can be able to share the information with you after the workshop. And if you have got any other further question, you can write it on the chat box. We will answer that. Okay, thank you very much. Lauren, over to you.
Great, thank you, Silas, and thank you to the team from IISD. So now we're going to continue our reflection on energy poverty in South Africa. We're going to broaden our view first. So we have a panel which is made up of 3 speakers. The first speaker is Bathandwa Vazi. She's the project manager at Sustainable Energy Africa. She has extensive experience in local government support, particularly around building capacity and providing efficient services with a specific focus on the provision of sustainable energy services. She was very much involved in the writing up of the State of Energy in South African Cities Report 2020 that was published near the end of last year, and particularly involved in the energy access chapter, which then also considers the issue of energy poverty in cities across the country. So I'm going to hand over to her for her presentation, and then we'll move on to the next panelist. So welcome, Bathandwa.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you so much for allowing Sustainable Energy Africa to be part of this amazing webinar and to also share what we also came up with from developing that chapter, but also just in general, our knowledge regarding energy access, affordability, as well as in responding to energy poverty. So I'll just upload my presentation quickly. Okay, it's just coming. Okay, I'm not sure if you can see it on your side.
Yes, we can see it, but Andrea, you can continue. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we're just going to look at how energy access is defined in terms of households and in terms of municipalities. So how does the provision of energy and sustainable energy actually improve energy poverty, especially from a low-income household perspective, but at the same time, how much does it actually cost? So as much as it won't be in detail, but to a certain extent, to understand how much cities actually have to spend towards the subsidization of energy in low-income households, and how it impacts their revenue as well. Just briefly. Just a quick background on who Sustainable Energy Africa is. So we are a non-governmental organization that works within the energy space, and we promote equitable access to clean energy in South Africa and Africa. By so doing, reducing energy poverty and contributing to the sustainability of urban settlements. And just an overview, just quickly on what we do. So basically, we do capacity building, technical capacity support, knowledge sharing, research, etc. So we do all of these things towards attaining energy sustainability in urban settlements, especially within cities. So an overview, just shortly, despite having sound policies around universal access and affordability to services, many urban households have inadequate energy supply and are unable to afford electricity. And I think this has been spoken about a lot just now. And this is affected or is impacted due to rapid urbanization, resulting in deepening poverty and inequality within cities, with a substantial number of people having no access to formal housing, including safe forms of energy. And the narrative has shifted from energy access, which is typical in developing countries, to fuel poverty or the inability to afford modern energy. So we've already covered a lot of that with regards to how informal settlements aren't able to afford sustainable energy. And in South Africa, one of the metrics for measuring energy poverty is the amount spent by households on energy. Those that spend more than 10% of their monthly income are deemed to be energy poor. And energy poverty also disproportionately affects women-headed households, as not only are fewer women employed, but also female workers earn on average 30% less than their male counterparts. So in essence, when looking at energy poverty, you're not just looking at households, but you're also looking at women-headed households and how not having access to energy actually puts women-headed households or women in general at a disadvantage. And again, we've already had a discussion around how within the country there has been universal access attained around the provision of electricity. However, in both formal and informal settlements, electricity consumption has slightly decreased from around 90% in 2011 to around 85% in 2018. And this, to a certain extent, has been due to the rising Eskom prices, which have pushed for more alternative energy sources to enter the energy mix at household level. And also the main fuels used, as per the graph, are candles for lighting, paraffin, solar energy, and electricity. So this shows that even municipalities are also trying to provide subsidy that is outside the provision of electricity or grid-connected electricity due to the rising costs incurred to provide that form of energy to households. Higher income houses are uptaking solar PV and energy efficiency to circumvent their energy needs, whilst lower income households use less safer forms of energy for lighting, cooking, and heating. And again, this is evident with how some municipalities have also resorted to providing candles and paraffin as an alternative form of energy as part of their FBE, but also besides that, lower income households in general, especially in informal settlements, they opt to use these forms of energy because they are more accessible to them and more affordable for them. Municipalities have included alternative energy sources in their energy subsidization again. For instance, metros such as Johannesburg, Tshwane, and Ekurhuleni have provided solar energy as part of their free basic energy support, whilst rural municipalities have included paraffin, fire gel, and other forms. Energy access is also a way of reducing poverty and balancing gender, economic, and spatial inequality through the ability to set tariffs that enable the sustainability of the electricity service. And of course, when we're talking about energy access, we cannot separate that from energy affordability because the two are intertwined. And affordability is linked to the distributive access to energy, which refers to the municipality's ability to procure bulk energy resources, sell and recoup all operational expenses, whilst ensuring a sustained provision of the service. And again, it also relates to the ability of the consumer to purchase energy at the prices set by the municipality or a service provider. It is measured according to the household expenditure allocation to essential needs and municipal service costs. And it is also a measure used to determine the package energy poverty by looking at consumers' income in relation to their ability to spend towards energy. So for most of the municipalities, they look at the affordability ratio of households, and this is normally done through their indigent registers. So some municipalities have classified low-income households in terms of a combined income of less than 3,000 per month, and some have looked at using a threshold of 1,600 per month. So looking at spending 10% of that on a monthly basis towards energy. It is then regarded as having or being exposed to energy poverty. And that is how most of the municipalities then determine who to support and who to subsidize and who to offer the free basic service to. So in essence, we can say that having access to energy resources and the lack thereof correlates with the ability to afford such services, and thus the inability to afford renders one energy poor. So that is where the connection is, but also to look at the opportunities available for those who cannot afford. So basically not having access to energy or sustainable energy or affordable energy kind of limits the opportunities for those who cannot afford it, because we do know that having access to energy does improve the economic status of households, it improves their health, and many other things that are related to that, as well as reducing the risks of climate change. And again, we cannot separate the conversation away from gender, because we do know that the majority of South African households are actually led by women, and even with those households that where we have both partners within the household, women are generally responsible for the uptake of the household, and they are typically primary users and managers of energy, and therefore carry the greatest burden of the impacts of energy poverty. And the choices are normally influenced again by the affordability, convenience, and accessibility. And generally, women have more awareness about the cost, convenience, and accessibility to energy fuels, as they are more involved in home-based productive tasks. And by default, households that are compelled to use energy sources that are easily available, and these often tend to be unclean and unsafe fuels. So it's important to also look at gender and mainstream gender when looking at energy poverty and how to respond to that. Again, just to touch on this, it won't be very extensive, but just to understand that tariff cross-subsidization in FBE is what is used mainly by cities to circumvent or to support lower income households. Cities use municipal surcharges, high income household tariffs, and commercial tariffs to cross-subsidize low income households. and the substantially pro-poor subsidies exist within the electricity industry and were estimated to be at least 8 billion per annum in 2010. The extent of the cross subsidies from commercial and high consuming residential customers to indigent customers within metros is significant, an amount well over 1 billion per annum in the case of Johannesburg and Cape Town, respectively. The minimum quantity of FB provided remains at 50 kilowatt hours per household and is often linked to a municipality's indigent register. And using a mixture of energy sources in FBE allocations, it's also important. And by 2018, 22 municipalities have provided free solar electricity systems and to about 113,000 households. So it's important to understand that whilst looking at cross-subsidization options, we also need to factor in energy efficiency and more renewable energy sources to sort of bring down the cost that is incurred by respective cities to ensure that this is done. And also, just to bring forth again how the provision of sustainable energy actually has a socioeconomic benefit to communities. Energy has a very big role to play in building societies, both economically and socially. And access to alternative clean energy sources enables for an uninterrupted energy supply and ensures continued economic activity, including education and health. And access to alternative clean sources of energy through the FBE and cross-subsidization not only benefits the end user, but it also reduces the municipality's costs, including the cost of the electricity service over time, such as generation costs, etc. And these gains can be made over time as energy efficiency and renewable energy alternatives are adopted from each segment in the electricity chain and electricity supply chain. At a secondary level, renewable energy sources and energy efficiency options result in lower electricity system costs and increased reliability and improved energy security. Affordable access to sustainable energy is paramount to ensure that more households continue to have energy and that municipalities remain financially viable. So there is a linkage in all of this, and there are benefits to be gained from all parties involved. And lastly, in conclusion, we need to be aware that low-income households consume much less energy. However, it costs the municipality much more to ensure the provision of energy-related services to such households. And the cross-subsidization from commercial and business customers may also not be sustainable in the long run due to many of these customers opting to leave the grid or to install rooftop PV to minimize their grid-based electricity consumption, which can likely impact municipal revenues. Energy poverty is an economic and socioeconomic issue that needs to be addressed in a holistic manner by ensuring access to economic opportunities for disadvantaged groups, diversifying energy resources, and empowering consumers to generate their own energy. And lastly, energy access needs to include gender mainstreaming, and many of these solutions need to place women at the center. Thank you so much again for the opportunity.
Great, thank you, Bathandwa, for that incredibly rich and thorough, comprehensive overview of the challenge of energy poverty in South Africa. So I think as now going from this macro scale down to the micro scale of particular energy poverty intervention, I would like to hand over to Damian Conway, who is a director at the Sustainability Institute Innovation Lab. He is responsible for the design and direction, as well as the implementation of the iShack project, which is a social business that provides off-grid solar electricity services to residents living in urban informal settlements in South Africa. Their flagship project is based in Stellenbosch in the Western Cape, and is interesting for a number of reasons, not least of which is the integration of this private sector solution with the municipal systems that also seek to address energy poverty. So I would like to now hand over to you, Damian, for your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lauren. So, yeah, we've been around for a while, but just so some of you might have heard me bang on about this project many times before, but just by way of introduction, we were set up as the iShack project back in 2012 with funding initially from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and then the South African Green Fund. And the objective was to develop and implement a large-scale public-private model to provide households in unelectrified informal settlements with an entry-level free basic energy service using off-grid low-voltage solar technology, such as what I'm showing you here, which is a solar home system, 50-watt, 12-volt direct current, with very energy efficient appliances for lighting, media, TVs, laptops, cell phone charging, that kind of thing. And obviously very suitable for deployment in this kind of community, which is off-grid, difficult to place conventional infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. The idea behind the model is this, that low-income households who qualify for indigent support in the form of free basic services, but who are not on the grid, can take the first step out of energy poverty if their subsidy can be used to fund the hardware and the running costs of an off-grid solar service. And so it's a kind of an energy ladder approach, starting at the bottom with an off-grid solar home system just for lighting and media, then perhaps adding gas for cooking, and then energy efficient appliances, insulation for the dwelling, solar water heating, and eventually getting to grid electricity. And what we've shown is that, you know, there's often an objection that this might be kind of double expenditure on infrastructure, but what we've shown is that because the running costs of providing a temporary off-grid solar service, say over a 2 to 3 period, is substantially lower than just the maintenance cost for a municipality or ESCOM of the grid. There's no risk of that double expenditure. Obviously, you can't compare the utility value, the amenity value of a grid connection to a solar home system, particularly an entry one for lights and media, but it is useful to just make the comparison. So as an example, Cape Town reportedly spends about 500 Rand per month per household just on grid maintenance. That excludes the infrastructure costs, it excludes the cost of the free basic units, which can be around 100 Rand a month. It's more in a place like Stellenbosch, for example. And it excludes the cost of subsidizing that lower block tariff on the Lifeline tariff for low-income households. By comparison, the total cost, which would be the hardware and the running costs, so the maintenance service of a off-grid service is comfortably below 200 Rand per household per month, say for a community of 1,000 households. And even if you added gas, subsidized gas, you would still be well below that O&M cost. And if you did that, the municipality would actually be then complying with the 2005 National Framework for Municipal Indigent Policies, which is to progressively deliver a basic service that is sufficient for lighting, media, and cooking. The advantage of this kind of alternative service delivery technology is that it does create the space for private sector to contribute with a fixed term intervention that is contracted by the municipality with a well-defined service quality specification. And as long as that monthly per household subsidy is guaranteed for around 3 years, then the private operator can be relied on to invest the upfront capital. Apart from the obvious household benefits of transitioning to clean, safe, affordable energy, an added bonus and something of particular interest to this webinar, I think, is that the private operator can create the platform for local job creation, green skills development, and micro-enterprise opportunities, such as micro-franchising or other models that can generate rapid and low-cost growth of the service. In the iShack project, we are packaging our model into a kind of micro-franchise offering where enterprising local entrepreneurs are trained on our quality systems and procedures to then go out and provide installation and maintenance services to households within their community and then generate commission-based income from that. In terms of risks, there are obviously a wide variety of other positive social and economic impacts that accrue locally, both for the community and for local government. And certainly, transitioning to clean, safe energy such as solar helps to reduce those risks of shack fires, respiratory health, etc., etc. Also, critically, because a model such as ours requires some co-payments from the end users, and that can be for the cost of the installation or for upgrades or for particular maintenance costs such as new batteries. This does help to establish a more neutral transactional relationship between the client and the service provider. And that can, to some extent, can counteract the sometimes negative consequences of providing an entirely free service. And in turn, this keeps pressure on us as the service provider to maintain a high quality service. What we've learned over the years is that it's really important to do solid groundwork at the beginning and throughout the service, working with community leaders and within the community themselves to kind of build that trust and the buy-in that's so important for the success of these kinds of alternative models. Because you do at the very, it's all very well lobbying local government and municipalities and third-party funders to support these models, but if the communities themselves don't recognize the value of this kind of alternative and limited kind of technology, then you're never going to get off the ground. We currently have 5 different sites in Stellenbosch and Cape Town, each with different funding models, but all with some degree of subsidization. Our flagship, as Lauren mentioned, is in Stellenbosch, where we have a service level agreement with the municipality, which is on a 3-year rotation. So every 3 years we have to rebid on a competitive basis. And at the moment we're serving about 1,600 households. And in exchange, we get the free basic electricity subsidy, and that goes towards the running cost of the service. The municipality was able to do this relatively simply. We did invest upfront grant funding into the project, but they amended their indigent policy to allow for an indigent household to access either free grid units if they're on the grid, or a solar home system that's provided by an energy service company. So the bit in red here is what they added to their indigent policy, which then enabled them to go out on tender to recruit, in this case, ourselves as the service provider, and we get the equivalent RAND value of those 100 free units every month. Back to the energy ladder idea, the learning curve over the last 8-9 years has been steep. We continue to evolve our model. At the moment, we're working with Stellenbosch Municipality to work out a smooth process for households to actually transition to that final stage of grid electricity. And from our point of view, that's really important. That's a really important part of the puzzle, that transition is possible, that it's smooth and that, you know, we don't lose a whole lot of infrastructure in the process. In summary, I would say that to the question of the opportunities for private involvement, yes, there are rich opportunities, as well as opportunities for job creation in the green economy, for public-private models and all of that. As an applied research organization, we've experimented with a wide range of business and pricing models over the years. But in South Africa, free basic service delivery remains a strong democratic expectation, which is acknowledged in our existing laws and policies. And so it's our conclusion that the only way we can unlock the many benefits of this kind of energy ladder approach, using these kinds of alternative technologies as stepping stones towards full provision, and using models such as ours, and to see these benefits at national scale. The only way to do that is for local government to take the lead and adopt these models. And I like what Thandeka said about adopting a variety of models, not choosing one, giving households choices, perhaps giving them a coupon to use to choose the kind of energy that they want to use. While there's no doubt there's a great role, an important role for private sector to play in that, it cannot be left to a purely commercial, unsubsidized model, because those models cannot achieve universal access. And so they cannot really make a meaningful contribution to a just urban transition. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much for that, Damian. So before we open for questions, I see there are already some questions coming in. What I'd like to do now is to invite Thandeka to take the floor again, and perhaps to respond to some of the issues that were raised, issues and opportunities, risks and opportunities that have been raised by Thandeka and by Damian respectively. I think, you know, definitely reinforcing the message that you put forward at the beginning of this session, which is that it's complex. You know, energy poverty is a multifaceted challenge. When you start tinkering in one part of the system, as pointed out by Andrea in his presentation, there are perhaps some hopefully intended results, but also many unintended ripple effects that move through the system on a local level and on a national level. And I think, you know, it was really great that Damian pointed, I think, to the specific opportunity that local governments have, who are very often left out of the national policy around the just transition. A transition towards a just energy system in South Africa is really seen as a national problem. But so many of the challenges and so many of the opportunities for more equitable outcomes do manifest at the local scale. So thank you very much to both of those speakers. And Thandeka, yes, over to you for your responses, your thoughts and reflections.
Thanks, Lauren. I think both speakers have covered it very well. And we have seen, I think the private sector has a very big role to play. And if we do work together, I think both the private sector and public sector, we can see a blended approach in solving some of these challenges relating to energy poverty, particularly relating to mitigating the risk to the current subsidization model. And also just the acknowledgement that the private sector is already innovating around a lot of these energy solutions at the community level, and they're doing it very effectively. We've also have seen a lot of innovation with technology, not just from not just the energy technology, but also payment systems. And I think we've learned a lot already. Sorry, Lauren, you're typing your thing.
Oh,
there's a lot of feedback.
Apologies, yeah. I was taking some notes, but I'm going to mute myself now.
Yeah. So there has been a lot of innovation, not just from the actual energy service, but also the payment systems, which are very great, and we've learned a lot from, for example, the iShack model, the pay gas model, to see how we can use these models, for example, to distribute a voucher system for households to access any alternative energy service that they think will be best suited for their needs. We've also seen a lot of data collection methods that is done by the private sector, which can benefit us a lot as municipalities. So I think most of the work that has been done by the private sector has been around showcasing and giving evidence around finance and distribution models that can work on the ground, that are responsive to community needs, and just putting them out there for municipalities to adopt. And hopefully we are working around those tinkering and looking at the constraints that we're faced with to see what is implementable and what can work and what cannot work.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that, Thandeka. And so now I would like to invite Silas to help me just track questions that are coming in. We already have the first question. Just a little reminder, you can also direct questions to the IISD team as well, to Andrea and Lisbeth. I see that there were a few questions for them earlier on in the chat as well. But perhaps while you're readying yourselves, the first question here from Chris is a question for Damian, and it says, in my experience, a low voltage PV system installed in an informal dwelling will not necessarily resolve illegal electricity connections to the grid, as people are desperate for a heating and cooking solution, which would not necessarily be provided by the solution. Have you experienced this in your project, and any reflections on that? Thanks, Damian.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good point. The challenge for municipalities and where Eskom supplies direct around what we tend to call informal connections is huge, and we have that in all of our projects as well. And our work is not intended to crowd out or obviate the temptation or negate the temptation to use an informal connection if one can, because yes, that energy ladder is not the full provision even of the basic service, let alone what a modern household should be able to have access to in terms of energy. But it is a challenge that isn't necessarily solved just when a household is formally connected to the grid either. So the bypassing of meters, et cetera, is an ongoing challenge, and that is a political problem as well as a technical one. But one has to start somewhere, and what we do certainly find in our projects, in all of our sites, is that that entry-level service certainly helps, and it's quite funny when we've had sort of positive feedback from our clients during load shedding, when even if they've got our service and they've got an informal connection, they're rather happy to have at least some lights when the grid goes off.
Oh, okay, no, thank you very much, Damian. Also, a point to indicate here. Fully agree with you, Batando. According to one of the publications, in terms of access to electricity, which is what Sustainable Development Goal number 7, At a global scale, there has been an increase from 83% in 2010 to basically 90% in the following 8 years, that is 2018. However, looking at Africa in general, sub-Saharan Africa in particular, the picture looks too bad. There is high percentages of community population without access to electricity. You are absolutely spot on there in terms of access to electricity. It's quite crucial. And also your point around the fact that cross-subsidization, take into account the increase into the solar PV installation for self-generation or self-consumption. It may have, or to a certain extent, have impact on the municipal income, which may have negative impact on the cross-subsidization. Thank you very much for those points. Yeah, colleagues, you can raise hand and ask any question. We're still open for questions and answers. And of course, comment and answers. Does this mean that Lauren, the panelists, were spot on, clear?
I think absolutely. I do have a question myself for the panelists. So Damian mentioned some of the opportunities that exist for micro opportunities that exist for local economic development, that is building off these energy services. And I was wondering if any of our participants from other municipalities, and perhaps also then to Thandeka as well, to what extent are these micro opportunities for LED seen as significant? To what extent would the availability of these opportunities, the potential for these opportunities, be taken into consideration when perhaps choosing various strategies for energy access in low-income communities, and particularly in informal settlements context? So yeah, it's a question for Thandeka, but it's also a question to really any of the participants who are also involved in these discussions within their municipal contexts.
Thanks, Lauren. I will try and respond to such a very big question. I think previously the Lines department has done other similar projects relating to energy alleviation in the city. I don't know if you know of the ceilings retrofit project, and that project really worked around. It really ensured that local contractors were trained and also benefited from that project. So yeah, we've also, I think we have a very good understanding of the fact that whatever solution that we look at does not only benefit the household, but the community as a whole. We've recently published an RFI, and one of the main areas was to try and see how it can benefit, how the provision of public lighting can benefit a community as a whole, and also what kind of economic opportunities can arise from that. So and there were a lot of responses around also hiring of community liaison officers at the community level, and people that were going to do the installation. So there is a lot of opportunity for these kinds of projects to revive the local economy and provide opportunities for employment for communities. Yeah.
And with those kinds of solutions, would you see them as being integrated into the public works, EPWP or community works programs, or would they be, something separate? Would you be looking to develop a sort of city-specific model for that those last mile distribution opportunities, and as you say, also other infrastructure, so lighting infrastructure provision?
So I don't know about how we're going to fund some of these projects. I will say a lot of our work is dedicated on understanding where the funding will come from. Some of the, if we refer to the RFI that we've recently published, some of the service providers actually pointed out to some of the funding sources that we can use that are already available for municipalities. And we are also currently in consultation internally to understand how we can access funding for some of the interventions. It is difficult because there are a lot of requirements that we would have to abide to, and some of those alternative energy sources are not supported. So it has been an ongoing discussion and really trying to find opportunities rather than looking at what wouldn't work. So I can't really say where the funding sources would come from, but yeah, it's a very difficult situation right now.
Great. And then Chris, could I call on you perhaps to put your comment forward, and if there's a question in there as well?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Well, just the comment, we're talking about the electrification of informal areas and PV solutions, etc. But at the end of the day, no matter what system you put in place, the people are going to steal electricity and create unsafe, hazardous connections to the electricity network. Okay, unless you put a full 40,000 Rand PV system in the house, you won't suffice the demand. Okay, so in my view, what Munich should be doing, we should be increasing the free basic issue to our customers from 50 kilowatt hours. I know Eskom are looking at 150 kilowatt hours, but even 150 kilowatt hours will not suffice the demand. I believe that between 250 and 350 should be issued to the socially disadvantaged customers. And we'll also improve that customer relationship with these people as well, because that's lacking at the moment as well. They seem to be left out of the equation in terms of service delivery, etc. Okay, but by doing that, you're going to reduce your maintenance costs. This year alone, Buffalo City, we had about 60 transformers blow up because of illegal connections, for example. And each transformer is 250,000 Rand a time. So it's a lot of money we're talking about. All the staff involved in terms of maintenance, in terms of getting that circuits back on, changing the transformers, you're going to save all those costs. If you can have a formal connection, give them what they need, okay, until they can afford to pay. And once they can afford to pay and they've got the jobs creations have been there, then you can solve the problem. But until that time, unfortunately, we have to accept the social responsibility of uplifting these communities. Thanks.
No. You're on mute, Lauren.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Silas. Thank you very much for that comment. Rual Jacobs, apologies if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. Please, could you turn on your microphone and share your reflection with us? Oh, okay. I'm not sure if Rol is still on the line with us. While we're working that out, perhaps Bathandwa, would you like to come in with your comment, please?
Thanks, Lauren. No, what I was saying is that I think there is a big gap that exists between engaging citizens in all these things that municipalities are doing, and I think it's important. It has been shown to work, because I think part of this has to do with some sort of a behavioral change that citizens need to look at or adopt, or to sort of look at things from a different perspective. And it is also important to sort of emphasize the need to provide these services. So yes, I do agree with Thandeka that most of the time low-income households or even informal settlement households don't usually want to have these kind of energy systems, or they don't have an appetite for them. But I think engaging them prior and engaging them, looking at all the benefits and opportunities that these create. So your LED, responding to climate change, energy affordability, and also just emphasizing the need to provide, so that they know that the municipality is looking out for them, whilst other means to create a grid-based connection or a more sustainable connection are being looked at. Thanks.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Batandwa. Agree with you on the point of awareness in particular. There was a project back then that was done in year 2000 in the Eastern Cape area called Luqingweni. It was a mini grid, solar photovoltaic. It collapsed in 2-3 years time. However, one of the main challenges was the community involvement, community awareness. Community in that rural area did not know the solar PV, did not know the value of the project, and they ended up vandalizing it. So it's quite important. It's a good point that community engagement is to a certain extent underestimated. It works very well. Once community get to know the value of the project, they will protect it themselves against vandalism. The other point or question rather to one of the speakers is the issue of Damian in particular, communication to in the community that you install this solar project. To what extent do you engage the community to ensure that they get to understand and buy into the project? Thank you.
Yeah, that's absolutely critical. And as I said, with now 5 different sites, there's been different models and so different kind of levels of communication. But at the moment, we're actually doing two quite interesting sites near the airport. So rather than it's different to Stellenbosch, because rather than a fixed monthly subsidy, what we're getting is an upfront fixed grant. And we have to generate all the rest of our revenue from the households themselves. And what we've done is we've been fortunate to have 2 quite strong leadership structures in each of those communities. So we've engaged them with workshops, and we've been partnering with Green Cape on that. And then done a lot of work in the communities themselves. So some of those pictures that I showed in my presentation was images of that engagement, because it is really important. And one of the things that helps to kind of neutralize the political kind of hotbed of these kind of basic service delivery is to have a co-payment element, so that the household still has to opt in financially. And then it is a choice that they are making with the very limited financial means that they have to either opt into it or not, and the degree to which they would opt into it. And so we found that way of both doing the engagement, the technology introductions, all of that, but also having this element of a financial transaction and a financial relationship or a transactional relationship helps to kind of bed down some of the other problems that can creep in. I wanted to just make a point, which I chatted at Chris's point, is I completely agree that if municipalities could just provide 300 free units, that would solve many problems and many of the unintended consequences of too little free basic electricity. But there remains tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of households that are still going to be waiting 3, 4, 5, sometimes even more than 10 years to get that grid connection. And that's what we need to be thinking about in terms of these alternatives. The renewables as an alternative do not yet compete, especially on an off-grid basis, with the grid. So you can never look at those 2 ideas as is as in competition. The one is very much as an entry-level stepping stone towards some kind of dignified, sufficient provision of energy.
So thank you very much for that, Damian. There is a comment here that I would like to just raise up surface for everybody and for any of the speakers to respond to. The comment reads as follows. You're implementing all of these sustainable options and for informal settlements to have access to electricity. I think here what's being referred to specifically as private pay for service interventions. Our people don't have money, and the latest, I think that the question is really that there are all these innovations that are available. However, people simply don't have the cash to opt in and pay for services, given their limited means. So I guess there's a question there around the viability of some of these private sector solutions. In informal settlement contexts. So I wonder, Bathandwa, if you might start off the reflection there because of your insights into just really how much money people are spending of their very limited income on various energy services. So I'm thinking of, candles and liquid fuels, whatever else is being sort of substituted in, perhaps as a starting point for a response to that comment. Bathandwa.
Yes, thanks, Lauren. I actually felt like Damian's comments just now sort of responded to that. But of course, there'll always be a cost implication involved. But I think the bigger picture is looking at reducing the amount of money that households are spending. Like we said, most of these households actually spend 10% or more, likely more of their income. And obviously 10% of 1,600 is far more than 10% of 20,000, for example. And because of their location, they also look at the convenience of getting access to whatever energy source or fuel that they can use. So I think the question shouldn't necessarily be that all these alternatives still require households to spend, but rather looking at lessening the spend and providing an alternative, and for a period long enough for the municipality to sort of build more sustainable sources. We are aware that municipalities are also looking at more long-term forms of sustainable energy or renewable energy and other partners involved. So yes, because at the end of the day, cities also need to balance the cost to maintain and to maintain this operation and the revenue that they are getting from this operation. So I think it's a myriad of things. So it shouldn't only be looked at just the fact that they still need to spend money. They will still spend money, but it will be less than what they are currently spending.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. And Thandeka, perhaps you would like to come in, or anyone else?
Yeah, so the City of Cape Town is also currently doing a study just to look at the ability to pay at the household level. Unfortunately, it's still at the very early stages. So it's looking at trying to understand what low-income households can pay for different services. And once that study has been completed, I think we'll have a little bit of a bigger picture around how much can households really pay for certain services. But also, I think focusing on energy efficiency is very important, particularly given that we've seen that the FBE allocation does not last long for households. So we need to look at how we can stretch the already available amount so that it lasts households for much longer. And that can also include a combination of other energy services, for example, LPG for cooking, and so looking at both, looking at how we can stretch the FBE allocation to last longer for households is very important. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I wanted also to indicate here to you, Thandeka, that looking at the graph in terms of Northern Cape, they seem to be the only municipality of providing all these sorts of free basic alternative energy. Maybe in your investigation, as you said, is the current status quo, or that you're investigating on the alternative energy. You can maybe also look at the province and check with some of the municipalities as to what are the success factors in providing the free basic alternative energy. I know there are a number and variety of factors and parameters that are considered in this. And of course, Northern Cape being the province with the least number of population in the country, maybe it might be for some reasons viable for them to provide all these sorts of free basic alternative energy. Perhaps it's something that you may look at when you continue with the investigation on the possibility of providing free basic alternative electricity. Thank you.
Thanks, Alice. We'll contact them. We're also working with Green Cape, and I think there's a conference that's coming up at the end, towards the end of this month. They are going to invite several other stakeholders to look at alternative or funding for alternative energy services. So, because I think some of the issues are around funding, some of this, so it's really the funding issue.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody, from my side. If there are no further comments, I would like to thank all of our speakers for their various contributions and for the rich discussion today. Thank you to WWF as well for your ongoing collaboration and support and for facilitating this particular engagements. And yeah, thank you very much to my colleagues at SALGA. Thank you to all of the participants. And Silas, I will hand over to you to wrap up.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Lauren, for handing over. I'm also going to do the same. Anyway, want to remind the delegates that we will be sending the slides, the presentations to all those that have provided us with the email addresses. And without any further ado, it's actually 13:54 now. I'm going to hand over to Nhlahlangidi. Nhlahlangidi is actually my boss. He's the head of energy and electricity at SALGA. So, in the webinar, you never speak and do not give your boss an opportunity to speak. That may have a detrimental effect. Okay, over to you, Mr. Ngidi. Thank you.
Thanks, Silas. I think, and thank you, everyone. On a lighter note, I think your statement toward the end, it went all wrong. In the environment that I work in, there is no boss. All of us are just foot soldiers running around every day trying to make a better place for municipalities. So when he talks about the word boss, for me, it's just, but anyway. Guys, I've been listening to these discussions, quite intriguing discussions. At some point, I wanted to chip in, but I thought maybe what I want to talk about, because it's not necessarily for everyone that is presenting and for the purposes of this discussion to answer, but maybe it's something that we all have to think about. I had a look up, over the weekend around countries that are doing well with just energy transition. And they all have common things that they've done with their policies, especially coming from their national government and prioritizing just energy transition, which makes me ask a lot of questions about what exactly have we got a well-coordinated government program on just energy transition. We are here, all of us, we are the stewards of just energy transition. And that's why we have the webinar like this. That's why we have such excellent presentations that were done today. But we need an environment that will enable us to actually do our work much better and much more easier. And that is actually enabled by the policy and by the government initiatives to get towards that path, which is the just energy transition. I'm viewing our country, unfortunately, is still taking just energy transition as a consequence, not as something that is a main, a main program that needs to be elevated and needs to be up there with other programs. Because obviously this is quite critical. We are transitioning. Yes, it's a consequence mostly, but since we've seen it's a consequence, why don't we actually organize ourselves more and have this driven at government, a well-coordinated program that outlines all sort of policy issues and implementation issues that needs to be in place for all of us to get to a point where we do just energy transition without having a lot of difficulties, which is normally the case. If we start working on things without really clear policies of doing them, we're gonna do them, but we're gonna have a hard time doing them. So basically, I think all of us don't like to have a hard time when we're doing things. Let me just come back to the closing remarks, because I might get carried away and take long. First, I just want to thank Thandeka, Damian, Andrea, Louise, Batandra for the excellent presentations. Thank you very much for making your time to share with us your experiences and the presentations that you've made. I think it goes without saying, looking at, there's almost 40 people here, if not more, but your presentation was so crystal clear in such that, I mean, you had less questions than anything else. I mean, it was more comments, maybe a little bit of issues of clarity, but I think, I mean, that is an indication of excellent presentations, and I thank you for that. Going back to the statement that I was just making right now, I was not making a swipe to our own national government, but it's just because I'm a steward of just energy transition. I would like to challenge our government more. I'm looking at this top 10 countries on just energy transition. Number 1 is Sweden and number 10 is Iceland. I think all of them have common things. An accelerated transition to a net zero emission economy by 2050. All of them, they wrote white papers around that. More investment in resilient infrastructure and effective climate solutions, especially those that fully leverage job opportunities on a zero carbon industry. Also to support for longer term market-wide policy mechanisms, such as pricing around the just energy transition, pricing around the issues of brown power that we still very much have in the system. How in this transition do we manage the pricing issues as well, especially because the transition affects those who are mostly not so fortunate as well. So basically, I am yet to see a well-coordinated policy statement for the country on just energy transition. Yes, we are talking about it there and there, but don't you think that our energy policy should be making this one of the key items in the policy? IRP, it should be there as one of the key items. How should we manage the just energy transition? I think as much as we talk about it, but in other aspects of our work and maybe some policy programs, but I don't think we have elevated it in such a way that it becomes a main program, as much as it's scary how transition is actually taking place right now in the country and globally. But I think, we don't need that very harsh wake up at a later stage and then we start playing catch up. So colleagues, that was just for me to throw it out there as part of my closing remarks. And with that, I would like to thank everyone. And for those who have also attended, the numbers of the attendance is quite overwhelming, which shows that everyone, I think most of us are stewards of this kind of work. Thank you very much, colleagues. And I know that we have other couple of webinars lined up, also on the same subject, but maybe different aspects of the subject. So please make your time next time for this webinar. I think all of us are learning. It's quite great. It's exciting for all of us. So again, thank you, Lauren and the team. Thanks, Silas. I'm not going to say my right-hand man because it's going to mean I'm your boss. I'm going to say my wingman. Because I'm also your wingman, also equally so. So thank you very much, colleagues. Let me close it there before I mess up my very nice closing statement. Thank you very much, and goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.